She thought it was just another long shift, until Clint Eastwood walked in and left her a note that changed everything. A struggling waitress, a legendary Hollywood icon, and a life-altering secret hidden in a simple piece of paper. What did he write that left her in tears? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The flickering neon sign above Mason's Diner buzzed in the quiet night, casting a pale glow over the cracked pavement outside. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of sizzling bacon, freshly brewed coffee, and the faint traces of grease that clung to the edges of the counter. The hum of conversation had begun to dwindle, the dinner rush giving way to a slower, more subdued rhythm as the clock above the register ticked past 7 p.m. The clinking of silverware against plates, the occasional shuffle of boots on the linoleum floor, and the low murmur of the jukebox playing an old country song were the only sounds that remained. At the heart of it all, Mia Carter moved between tables with the practiced ease of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of balancing plates, refilling coffee cups, and keeping a weary smile on her face. 28 years old, a single mother, and no stranger to long hours, Mia had mastered the ability to push through exhaustion, to ignore the aching in her feet, the tight pull in her lower back, and the gnawing anxiety that always seemed to linger at the edge of her thoughts. The diner wasn't just a job, it was survival. The meager wages and unpredictable tips were what kept a roof over her and her 6-year-old son Jordan's heads. Every dollar she earned had a purpose. Rent, groceries, school supplies, and the growing stack of bills that sat ominously on her kitchen table. She glanced toward the register where Pete, the gruff but kind-hearted diner owner, was ringing up a regular. He caught her eye and offered a nod, his silent way of acknowledging that another long shift was coming to an end. Mia exhaled softly, rolling her stiff shoulders as she wiped her hands on her faded apron. Just a few more hours. That was the mantra that had kept her going for years. The regulars at Mason's knew her story, at least the part she allowed them to see. Some of them, like Old Man Harris, who came in every Tuesday for meatloaf and mashed potatoes, would leave an extra couple of dollars on the table when they could. Others would tell her to keep the change with a knowing glance, understanding that every little bit helped. But Mia never asked for pity. Life had been relentless, but she had learned long ago that there was no point in waiting for rescue. No one was coming to save her. It was her and Jordan against the world. Still, there were nights when the weight of it all felt unbearable. Nights when she would tuck Jordan into bed, kiss his forehead, and then sit at the tiny kitchen table in their one-bedroom apartment, staring at the unpaid bills, wondering how much longer she could keep juggling everything before something came crashing down. But tonight wasn't one of those nights. Tonight was just another night. Another shift, another set of faces passing through the diner, leaving behind crumpled napkins and empty plates. Then the bell above the door chimed. Mia barely glanced up, expecting another road-weary traveler, a truck driver stopping in for coffee or a tired family needing a quick bite before continuing down the highway. But the moment the door closed behind the newcomer, something changed. The energy in the diner shifted. It was subtle but undeniable, a hush that settled over the room, a pause in the casual conversation among the few remaining customers. Mia felt it before she even understood why. The air seemed heavier, as if the very presence of the man who had just walked in had caused the world to slow. He was dressed simply, a button-up shirt, well-worn jeans, and a hat pulled low over his face. Nothing about his appearance should have drawn attention, and yet there was something undeniably commanding about him. He carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that needed no announcement, no introduction. Then he lifted his head, and Mia froze. Her breath hitched in her throat as her eyes locked onto his weathered face, his unmistakable features. She had seen this man before. Not in person, but on a screen, in the old westerns her late father used to watch on their ancient television set. Clint Eastwood. The Clint Eastwood. The realization sent a jolt through her, a mixture of shock and disbelief. What was he doing here? in a tiny roadside diner, when he could eat at the most exclusive restaurants in the world. She forced herself to breathe, to move, to think. This wasn't the time to stand there gawking like some starstruck teenager. He was just another customer. Except, deep down, something told her he wasn't. She grabbed her notepad, smoothed down her apron, and steadied herself, one foot in front of the other. As she made her way toward his booth, she couldn't shake the feeling that this night, this encounter, was about to change everything. Mia's fingers gripped her notepad a little too tightly as she made her way toward the corner booth where Clint Eastwood sat, his presence somehow filling more space than a single man should. Her heart hammered in her chest, her breath uneven. It wasn't the usual nervousness that came from waiting on a new customer or making small talk with strangers. This was different. This was Clint Eastwood, a living legend, sitting in her section of Mason's diner as if it were any ordinary night. She forced a breath, straightened her posture, and smiled just enough to seem natural. No matter how surreal this moment was, he was just another customer. She'd taken orders from truck drivers, drifters, and businessmen passing through town. This was no different, or so she tried to tell herself. As she reached his table, she noticed the way he lifted his gaze, those piercing eyes shadowed slightly by the brim of his hat. He had a presence about him, something unshakable, something timeless. His face was weathered, lined with experience, yet strong and unreadable. It was the same expression she'd seen in the movies her late father used to watch, the same unreadable calm of a man who had seen everything and let nothing faze him. But there was something else, a softness, a quiet thoughtfulness that seemed out of place for the man she'd always pictured as the untouchable outlaw, or the no-nonsense detective. Mia cleared her throat, willing herself to act normal. "Good evening," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "What can I get started for you?" Clint glanced at the laminated menu resting on the table, but he didn't pick it up. Instead, he set his hands on the surface. Steady, strong hands, aged with time and experience. He looked up at her again, those keen eyes watching her as if he were trying to read something in her that even she couldn't see. "Just a coffee and a burger," he said simply. Then, after a brief pause, "Medium rare, no onions." Mia nodded, scribbling it down. Easy order, simple. But there was nothing simple about this moment. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Busy night?" She hesitated for only a fraction of a second before turning back. Most customers didn't ask questions. They ordered, they ate, they paid, and they left. Small talk was reserved for regulars. But Clint Eastwood wasn't a regular. "Not too bad," she replied with a faint smile. "Keeps me on my toes." Clint gave a slow nod, his expression shifting just slightly, as if something about her answer meant more to him than it should have. "You've got a good pace," he remarked, lifting his water glass. "Not easy to keep up in a place like this." Mia blinked, surprised by the unexpected compliment. She wasn't sure how to respond. Was he just making conversation, or did he actually mean it? A beat of silence stretched between them, one that should have been awkward but somehow wasn't. She managed a small nod. "Thanks, I try." With that, she turned and walked back toward the counter, her heart still racing for reasons she couldn't quite explain. As she handed off the order slip to the cook, her mind spun. What was he doing here? It wasn't just that Clint Eastwood was famous. It was the fact that someone like him, someone with power and wealth, had chosen this tiny roadside diner over the countless upscale restaurants that would have catered to his every whim. Why here? Why tonight? She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, pouring his coffee, making sure the temperature was right. It was just another order, another night. But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself, she knew the truth. This wasn't just another night. As she carried the coffee back to his table, she noticed the way he sat, not in a rush, not impatient, but almost reflective. He wasn't scrolling through a phone, wasn't lost in paperwork like the businessmen who sometimes stopped in for late-night meals. He was simply there, fully present, fully aware. She set the coffee down carefully. "There you go, fresh pod." He nodded in thanks, wrapping his hands around the mug as if savoring the warmth. Mia lingered for half a second longer than she needed to, her curiosity itching at her. But she didn't ask. Instead, she turned and went back to work, stealing glances at him every so often, trying to make sense of the quiet mystery sitting in her booth. And somehow, deep in her gut, she knew this was only the beginning. Mia worked her way around the diner, moving with practiced efficiency. But she couldn't shake the feeling that something unspoken lingered in the air. Every few minutes, her eyes flickered toward Clint Eastwood's booth, watching as he slowly sipped his coffee, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Most customers either ate quickly and left or buried themselves in conversation with a companion. But Clint sat alone, his presence strangely heavy, yet not unwelcoming. He wasn't reading a newspaper or staring at his phone like the businessmen who sometimes passed through. He wasn't lost in thought the way weary truck drivers were after long shifts on the road. No, he was watching, observing, as if taking in every detail, every moment. And every so often, when Mia's eyes unintentionally met his, he would give a small nod, just a brief acknowledgement, nothing more. Yet it made her pulse quicken. She wasn't sure why this unsettled her, maybe because no one ever really saw her. She was used to blending into the background, a fixture of the diner like the napkin dispensers or the flickering neon sign out front. She was polite to customers, always professional, always warm, but she never expected them to truly notice her. Clint Eastwood, however, noticed. When his order was ready, Mia took a steadying breath and carried the plate to his booth. "Here you go. 1 burger, medium rare, no onions." He looked up, his sharp eyes studying her for a beat before he nodded. "Thank you." She had started to walk away when he spoke again. "What's your name?" The question stopped her. Mia had served hundreds, maybe thousands of customers over the years, and only a handful had ever bothered to ask. She was just the waitress, the server, the woman with a notepad and a polite smile. But this was different. She hesitated, shifting slightly on her feet before answering. "Mia." Clint's lips quirked up in the faintest hint of a smile. "Nice to meet you, Mia." There was something sincere in the way he said it. No forced pleasantries, no expectation of small talk. Just a simple, genuine acknowledgement. Mia nodded, a little unsure of what to say next. "Let me know if you need anything else." She turned and walked away, her stomach twisting with a strange, unfamiliar emotion. As she moved back behind the counter, she could feel the weight of that brief exchange settling over her. Why did it feel like something more? She shook off the thought and focused on her work, but as the minutes ticked by, she found herself stealing glances at Clint again. He ate slowly, almost methodically, as if savoring every bite. He wasn't in a rush. He was here for something else. Mia forced herself to concentrate on clearing tables, refilling coffee cups, and tending to the remaining customers. The dinner rush had died down now, leaving the diner bathed in a quiet hum of conversation and the soft clatter of silverware. Yet Clint's presence still weighed in the air, like a storm on the horizon that hadn't quite arrived. As she walked past his booth again, he spoke, low and steady. "Long shift?" Mia stopped. She could have brushed off the question with a simple yes. She could have nodded and moved on. But for some reason, she didn't. She exhaled, glancing at the clock. "Feels like it, but they always do." Clint studied her for a moment before speaking again. "You work hard." It wasn't a question. It wasn't flattery. It was simply a statement of fact. Mia let out a short laugh, though there wasn't much humor in it. "I have to." For the first time, Clint's expression shifted. Not pity, not sympathy, but understanding. "People don't always see it, do they?" he said. Mia stilled. Her fingers curled slightly against the edge of her apron. No, they didn't. She had spent years pouring herself into this job, balancing shifts with motherhood, scraping by, doing everything she could to give her son the life he deserved. And yet, most of the time it felt like she was running on empty, like she was giving everything and getting nothing back. She swallowed hard. "No, they don't." Clint nodded slightly, as if that answer meant something to him. as if he knew exactly what she meant. For the first time since he had walked into the diner, Mia felt something shift. This wasn't just about a meal. Something else was happening here, something unspoken, something weighty. And though she didn't understand it yet, she knew one thing for certain. Clint Eastwood wasn't just passing through. He had come here for a reason. And whatever that reason was, Mia had a feeling it was about to change everything. Mia hadn't expected the night to feel so different. It wasn't the first time a stranger had come into the diner. It wasn't the first time she had served a quiet man with thoughtful eyes and an unreadable expression. And yet there was something about Clint Eastwood's presence. Something lingering. Something heavy. The dinner rush had slowed. The hum of the diner had settled into a quiet murmur of clinking forks and whispered conversations. The neon sign out front flickered against the dark sky, casting a glow across the near-empty parking lot. Mia worked through her closing routine, wiping down tables, refilling salt shakers, checking the time every so often. But her gaze kept drifting back to the man in the corner booth. Clint had finished his burger, but he hadn't left. Instead, he sat there, his coffee cup still half full, his fingers tracing the rim absently, as if lost in thought. Mia's breath hitched when he suddenly looked up. Mia. The way he said her name made her freeze, not just because he had remembered it, but because he spoke it with weight, as if it meant something. She hesitated for only a second before walking over. "Everything all right?" she asked, forcing her voice to stay steady. Clint didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills, setting them on the table. But before she could reach for them, he placed something else beside them. A folded piece of paper. Her brows furrowed slightly. "What's this?" Clint pushed the note toward her and stood up. He was tall, taller than she had expected, and his presence somehow filled the space even more now that he was standing. His eyes met hers, steady and unreadable. "Read it when you get a chance." Mia swallowed, her fingers itching to grab the note, to unfold it right there, to demand answers. But something in Clint's gaze told her to wait, to let the moment sit. So she nodded, her throat dry. "Okay." Clint gave her one last small, knowing smile, and then, with the kind of quiet confidence only he could pull off, he turned and walked toward the door. The bell above it jingled softly as he stepped out into the night, disappearing into the shadows beyond the neon glow. For a moment, Mia didn't move. She just stood there, staring at the note as if it held the weight of the world. The diner felt different now, like something had shifted. Like something was about to change. With trembling fingers, Mia finally reached for the folded paper. She pressed it between her palms, feeling the weight of it, as if it carried something far more valuable than words. She could read it now. She should read it now. But somehow, she wasn't ready. So instead, she slipped the note into her apron pocket and went back to work. Her hands steady, her mind anything but. The night dragged on. Mia finished wiping down the last of the tables. She counted the register, stacked the chairs, locked the doors. The diner was silent now, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the back and the occasional creak of the old floors beneath her feet. Her shift was over, and yet she stood there, motionless, staring at her reflection in the darkened diner windows, her fingers brushing against the folded paper in her pocket. The note. Mia exhaled sharply, pulling it out. She unfolded it carefully, her breath catching as she scanned the first few words. "Dear Mia." Her heart pounded. "I don't know much about you, but in the short time I've been here, I've seen something rare. True resilience. Watching how you manage this place with grace, even under pressure, is a reminder of how much strength exists in the everyday heroes of this world." Mia's fingers tightened around the edges of the note. "You remind me of someone very dear to me, someone who taught me the value of hard work and kindness. I don't know your story, but I can see in your eyes that you've carried more than your share of burdens. That's why I want to do something. No strings attached." Her vision blurred, her throat tight. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep reading. I'm leaving a small gesture for you to use however you see fit, whether it's for your child, your future, or simply a moment of rest. I hope it brings you some peace. People like you deserve to be seen, and I see you." Mia's hands began to shake. She hadn't even noticed the check until it slipped from the folds of the note, fluttering onto the counter. Her breath hitched. Her knees nearly buckled. $10,000. The number stared back at her, written in perfect ink, as if it wasn't the most impossible thing in the world. Mia gripped the counter, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She read the note again, and again. And then, before she could stop it, a sob tore from her throat. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her body shaking. It wasn't just the money. It was the words. It was the acknowledgement. It was the feeling that someone as legendary as Clint Eastwood had seen her, really seen her. And in that moment, Mia's world cracked open. For years she had pushed forward, convinced that no one noticed, that no one cared. And now this letter, this check, this moment. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the note to her chest, a strange, overwhelming sense of relief crashing over her like a tidal wave. Because for the first time in years, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Oh. Mia sat motionless in the empty diner, her fingers trembling as they gripped the letter and check Clint Eastwood had left behind. The soft glow of the overhead lights flickered slightly, casting shadows along the walls, but she barely noticed. $10,000. The number was seared into her brain, yet it still felt like some kind of mistake, like an illusion that would disappear if she blinked too hard. Her first instinct was disbelief. Maybe it was a joke, a misunderstanding. Maybe he'd meant to leave the note for someone else. But deep down, she knew better. The words on the page weren't generic. They were for her. Clint Eastwood had noticed her, seen her struggle, and had chosen to do something unbelievable. Her breath came in shallow gasps as a wave of emotion surged through her. Gratitude, shock, fear, and something else, an overwhelming sense of responsibility. This wasn't just money, it was a choice. Mia clenched her hands into fists, her thoughts racing. What was she supposed to do with this? Pay off her overdue bills? Buy a better car so she wouldn't have to hold her breath every time she turned the key in the ignition? Enroll in the accounting classes she'd pushed aside for years? She could already picture Jordan's face when she told him. The idea of finally being able to give him something more, something better, sent another wave of tears down her cheeks. But then came the doubt. Why her? Mia had spent so much of her life believing she had to earn everything, that struggle was just a part of survival. Nothing had ever come easy. So why now? Why did someone like Clint Eastwood, a man who could have walked in, eaten his meal, and disappeared without a second glance, choose her? The thought terrified her. Was she even worthy of this kind of gift? The idea of using the money, truly accepting it, felt like stepping into unknown territory. And if there was one thing Mia had learned in her life, it was that unknown territory was dangerous. She needed to talk to someone. Without thinking, she reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone and dialing a number she knew by heart. "Girl, are you serious?" Tasha's voice echoed through the receiver, laced with disbelief. Mia had barely managed to get the words out, her voice shaking as she explained what had happened. Now, she sat curled up on the couch in her tiny apartment, the check resting on the coffee table, mocking her with its sheer impossibility. "I know it sounds crazy, Tosh. I don't even know what to do." There was silence on the other end, followed by a deep breath. "Mia." Her best friend's voice softened, but there was no mistaking the weight behind it. "This isn't crazy, it's a blessing. And you deserve it." Mia's throat tightened. "Do I?" she whispered. "Of course you do." Tasha's voice turned fierce, the way it always did when she saw Mia doubting herself. "You work harder than anyone I know. You bust your ass every day, making sure Jordan has a roof over his head, food on the table, and a mom who never quits, no matter how exhausted she is. And now, for once, someone is recognizing that? Mia pressed the heel of her hand against her eyes, trying to hold back the tears. I just don't know if I can accept it. Then don't think about it like that. Tasha's voice was gentle but firm. Think about what this could mean. Think about Jordan. Think about your future. You always talk about wanting to go back to school, to build something for yourself. Maybe this is the sign you've been waiting for. Mia swallowed hard. A sign. Could she really believe that? Could she let herself take this leap, to step into the unknown, not with fear, but with hope? For the first time in years, the possibility felt real. The next morning, Mia woke up with the check still on the table. She had barely slept, her mind restless with a million possibilities, but when she opened her eyes, a decision had been made. She wasn't going to waste this opportunity. She was going to use it to build something. Jordan was still asleep, curled up under the blankets, his little chest rising and falling peacefully. Mia took a deep breath, brushing her fingers gently through his soft curls. I'm going to do this for you, baby, she whispered. For us. With that, she grabbed the check, her heart pounding as she got dressed. She didn't know exactly where this road would lead, but for the first time, she was ready to find out. It was time to change her life. Mia clutched the check tightly as she sat in the front seat of her aging sedan, parked just outside the bank. The engine was still running, humming unevenly, a constant reminder of how much she needed this moment, how much she deserved this moment. But despite the weight of the check in her hands, a part of her still hesitated. Through the windshield, she watched customers come and go, stepping into the bright air-conditioned lobby and exiting with their business settled, their futures unchanged. But for her, this wasn't just a deposit. It was a decision, a leap into something she had never known: financial stability. For years, Mia had been trapped in a cycle of just scraping by, stretching every paycheck, counting every penny. The idea of suddenly having options was almost paralyzing. She had spent so long making do with less. How was she supposed to handle more? Her heart pounded as she looked at the paper again. $10,000. Even in her wildest dreams, she had never expected something like this. And now that it was real, now that it was in her hands, she was terrified of making the wrong choice. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed. Tasha. There was no greeting, no hesitation, just a quiet, urgent whisper. I don't know if I can do this. Tasha didn't miss a beat. Yes, you can. Mia exhaled sharply. What if I mess it up? What if I waste it? There was a pause on the other end before Tasha spoke, her voice calm, unwavering. Mia, you've never wasted anything in your life, not time, not effort, not love. Why would this be any different? Mia felt something in her chest tighten. Because this is a gift, Tosh, this isn't mine. It's something Clint Eastwood gave me, and what if I don't do it justice? Tasha let out a soft, knowing sigh. Then make it mean something. Those words settled deep into Mia's soul. Make it mean something. She looked down at the check one more time, inhaled deeply, and then, with a newfound determination, she stepped out of the car. Inside the bank, the air was cool against her skin. The smell of fresh paper, ink, and polished countertops filled her senses. A young teller greeted her with a bright, professional smile. How can I help you today? Mia hesitated for only a second before she slid the check across the counter. I'd like to deposit this. The teller's eyes widened slightly at the amount, but she quickly masked her surprise, typing away at her computer. That's quite a deposit, she said casually. Planning something special? Mia hesitated, but then, for the first time, she allowed herself to own this moment. Yes, she said, nodding firmly. I am. The transaction took only minutes, but as Mia walked back to her car, something inside her felt different. The money was no longer just a number on a check. It was a possibility, a future, a new beginning. That afternoon, Mia drove to the community college, her hands gripping the wheel with a determination she hadn't felt in years. She had spent so much time putting her dreams on hold, convincing herself that there would always be another time, another chance, another season, when she could afford to focus on herself. But now, now there were no more excuses. She pulled into the parking lot, staring up at the large glass doors of the admissions office. It was a place she had walked past so many times, always wondering, always wishing, but never believing it could be her on the other side. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. A woman at the front desk looked up, offering a warm smile. "Can I help you?" Mia squared her shoulders. "I'd like to enroll in accounting courses." The words felt surreal coming out of her mouth, but they were real. They were hers. The receptionist nodded, pulling out a clipboard with enrollment forms. "That's wonderful. Have you ever taken any college courses before?" Mia shook her head. "No, but I've always wanted to." As she filled out the forms, excitement warred with fear. Was she really doing this? Was she really making this choice? But every time she started to doubt herself, she thought about Jordan. She thought about Clint's letter. "People like you deserve to be seen. And I see you." By the time she handed the paperwork back, something inside her had shifted. This was it. She was finally stepping into her future. That night, as Mia sat at her kitchen table, reviewing the confirmation email from the college, Jordan climbed into her lap, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Mommy?" She kissed his forehead, tucking a stray curl behind his ear. "Yeah, baby." He yawned, curling into her chest. "Are things going to be different now?" Mia swallowed past the lump in her throat, holding him close. "Yeah, baby, they are." She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving, one step at a time. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind for Mia. Balancing her job at the diner, attending evening classes, and raising Jordan left her with little time to catch her breath. But exhaustion no longer felt like a burden. It felt like progress. Every sleepless night spent poring over accounting textbooks, every moment juggling numbers and equations, was another step toward a future she had never dared to believe in before. She wasn't just working to survive anymore, she was building something. For the first time in her life, Mia allowed herself to imagine a different future. A life where she wasn't just waiting tables, scraping by and counting every dollar. A life where she could provide for Jordan without fear of what the next month might bring. But as much as her own world was changing, Mia couldn't ignore the people around her. The single mothers, the struggling students, the exhausted workers she saw every single day. And the thought kept returning, louder than ever. What if this gift wasn't just meant for me? One evening, as she stood at the counter waiting for the next set of orders, Mia found herself watching a new waitress, a young girl named Kayla, no older than 19. The girl was trying, that much was obvious, but there was a tension in her shoulders, a slight panic in her movements, as if she was one mistake away from breaking down. Mia had seen that look before. She had worn that look before. So when Kayla fumbled a tray, nearly spilling a cup of coffee onto a customer, and froze in place, terror flashing in her eyes, Mia stepped in. "Hey, I've got it," she said softly, taking the tray from the girl's trembling hands. Kayla's eyes darted up, embarrassment written all over her face. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to." Mia shook her head, offering a reassuring smile. "Breathe, it's okay." The girl's lips quivered, her fingers twisting the hem of her apron. Mia leaned in slightly. "First job?" Kayla nodded, looking like she was about to cry. "Yeah, and if I mess this up, I don't know what I'll do. I need this job." Mia felt something stir deep in her chest. She had been here before. She had lived this fear, this desperation. Someone had seen her when she felt invisible. And now she could do the same for someone else. She placed a hand on Kayla's shoulder. "You're gonna be fine, okay? It's hard at first, but you'll get the hang of it. If you ever feel like you're drowning, come find me. I promise, I won't let you sink." Kayla blinked rapidly, nodding. "Thank you." Mia smiled, but in the back of her mind, the idea solidified. She had been blessed in ways she never expected. Now, she needed to pay it forward. That weekend, Mia took a deep breath and did something she had never done before. She started a fund. She sat down at the kitchen table, Jordan coloring beside her, and created a plan. A portion of the money Clint Eastwood had given her would go toward something bigger, something that could help people like her. She wasn't a millionaire. She wasn't someone with endless resources, but she had enough to make a difference. And that was a start. A month later, Mia walked into the grocery store near her apartment and saw an elderly woman at the register, counting coins with shaking hands, her face tight with worry. The line behind her was growing impatient. People sighed, shifting their weight, glancing at their watches. Mia didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, reaching into her purse, and handed the cashier a bill before the woman could protest. "It's on me," she said simply. The woman looked up, startled. "Oh, sweetheart, I can't." Mia squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, you can." Tears welled in the woman's eyes. She reached up, patting Mia's cheek with a trembling hand. "You don't know what this means." Mia swallowed past the lump in her throat. "I do." She kept going. A young mother at the laundromat struggling to scrape together enough quarters to dry her son's clothes. Mia left a folded bill on the bench when no one was looking. A college student at the library staring at a textbook she couldn't afford. Mia paid the fee anonymously. A fellow waitress who confided in her about not being able to afford gas to get home. Mia slipped a gift card into her apron pocket. And every single time, she thought about Clint's words. "People like you deserve to be seen." She had been seen. Now she was making sure others were too. One afternoon, after finishing an exam at the community college, Mia sat outside on a bench, watching the world move around her. Jordan was at school. Her classes were going well. She was making progress. Slow, steady, real progress. But something still tugged at her heart. Would she ever see Clint Eastwood again? Would she ever get the chance to tell him what he had done for her? She didn't know. Maybe she never would. But then again, maybe she would. And if that day ever came, she knew exactly what she would say. "Thank you. And I didn't waste it." Months passed, and Mia's life had transformed in ways she never could have imagined. She was still working at the diner, still putting in long hours, still juggling being a mother and a student, but something was different now. She had hope in ways she hadn't felt in years. Her shifts no longer felt like an endless cycle of exhaustion. Every time she wiped down a counter, served a cup of coffee, or carried a tray of plates, she knew she was working towards something bigger. She wasn't just surviving, she was building a future. Her classes at the community college were going well. Balancing work and school wasn't easy, but she had momentum and she wasn't slowing down. She aced her midterms. She started picturing what life might look like after the diner, what it might feel like to have a career in accounting, a stable income, a home where Jordan had his own room. Every night, she reminded herself, "You're getting there." One crisp evening, as Mia was closing up the diner, wiping down the last few tables, she heard the bell above the door chime. Her heart did a strange little jump. She turned, expecting to see a late-night traveler, maybe a trucker grabbing a quick bite before hitting the road. Instead, standing in the doorway, was him, Clint Eastwood. For a moment, she just stared. She had spent months wondering if she'd ever see him again, if she'd ever get the chance to thank him. And now, here he was, standing in the same small diner, in the same worn-out jeans and button-up shirt, his presence still carrying that effortless authority that made people stop and take notice. But tonight, there was something different in his eyes, something almost expectant, like he had been waiting for this moment too. Mia wiped her hands on her apron and took a steadying breath before stepping forward. "Mr. Eastwood," she said, her voice softer than she intended. Clint gave her that signature smirk, his eyes twinkling with quiet amusement. "Mia." He remembered her name. Her throat tightened, but she swallowed past it, forcing herself to breathe. "I didn't think I'd ever see you again," she admitted. Clint took a slow step toward the counter, resting his hands on the polished surface. "Didn't think I'd see you again either," he said. Then, after a brief pause, he tilted his head. "How's life treating you?" Mia's chest squeezed. How was she supposed to sum it all up? The night he left that note. The way she sat in the back room, crying over words that made her feel seen for the first time in years. The moment she enrolled in college, the quiet decision to start helping others, to pay it forward in ways big and small. How was she supposed to explain that she was different now? That she wasn't just the tired waitress scraping by, that she was becoming someone she was proud of. She took a breath and met his gaze. "I didn't waste it," she said simply. Something flickered across Clint's face. Understanding. He nodded once, slow, approving. Then, in that effortlessly cool way of his, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Mia's heart skipped. For a second, she thought it was another note, another impossible act of kindness that would leave her breathless. But as he unfolded it and slid it across the counter, she realized it wasn't a note at all. It was a newspaper clipping. Confused, she picked it up and scanned the bolded words at the top. "Local woman starts fund to help struggling workers and students, inspired by a stranger's kindness." Her breath caught in her throat. The article was about her. Someone at the community college had written about her story, about the small fund she had started, about the way she had been helping people, the way she had once needed help herself. Mia felt her fingers tremble as she looked back at Clint. He knew. He had been watching, paying attention, and now he had come back. She let out a shaky laugh, shaking her head. "You found out?" Clint smirked. "I always find out." A beat of silence passed between them. Then, without thinking, Mia reached across the counter and placed her hand over his, a quiet thank you in the form of touch. "I don't even know how to explain what you did for me," she whispered. "You don't have to," Clint replied. "You already did." Her throat burned. She nodded, blinking back the unexpected tears. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the diner, the faint clatter of dishes in the back, the neon glow of the "open" sign reflecting off the window. It all felt suspended in time. Then, Clint tapped the counter twice and stepped back. "Well," he said, adjusting his hat, "guess I should get going." Mia wanted to ask him to stay, to ask him why he had chosen her that night, to ask if he knew just how much he had changed her life. But instead, she just smiled and said, "Drive safe, Mr. Eastwood." Clint gave her a knowing nod, then turned and walked out the door, disappearing into the night just as quietly as he had the first time. Mia exhaled, pressing the newspaper clipping to her chest, holding on to the moment. Because somehow, she knew. This wasn't an ending. This was the beginning of something even greater. Mia's story is a powerful reminder that kindness has the ability to transform lives in ways we can't always predict. What started as a simple meal in a roadside diner became a moment of recognition, generosity, and change. Not just for Mia, but for everyone she would go on to help. Clint Eastwood's quiet act of seeing her, of acknowledging her struggle and her strength, gave her more than just financial relief. It gave her the belief that she was worthy of something greater. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to overlook the people around us. But this story teaches us that one moment of kindness, one decision to uplift someone, can create ripples far beyond what we see. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can change a life.